Hello there, and welcome to Life Beyond Seen, a quiet place where curiosity slows down, where big ideas are explored gently, and where science, geography, and human limits unfold at a pace meant for rest rather than urgency. Whether you've arrived here at the end of a long day, or you're listening while the world around you begins to settle, I'm glad you're here. Tonight's journey is not about rushing forward or reaching a conclusion quickly. It's about lingering with a question that seems simple at first, but grows larger the longer you sit with it. A question that has puzzled explorers, scientists, governments, and dreamers for centuries. Why, in a world mapped by satellites and scanned by machines, can't we truly explore the Amazon? Before we ease into that, take a quiet moment to notice where you are right now. Maybe you're listening from a city apartment with distant traffic humming like a low tide. Maybe you're somewhere rural, where the night sounds come from insects or wind instead of engines. Or maybe you're somewhere in between, drifting towards sleep with this voice as background. Wherever you are, you're part of the same planet that holds the Amazon rainforest, even if it feels impossibly far away. That alone is a curious thing. A place so vast, so alive, and yet for most of us, it exists only as an image, a green blur on a map, or a word spoken with awe. If you find this kind of slow exploration calming, interesting, or simply a good companion as you unwind, you're welcome to like the video or subscribe. It helps this space reach others who enjoy learning without urgency. There's no pressure, just an open invitation. Now let's begin. When people hear the word Amazon, they often picture a single thing. A jungle, thick trees, maybe a river cutting through endless green. It feels familiar, even cinematic. We've seen it in documentaries, in adventure films, in textbooks. But that sense of familiarity is misleading. The Amazon is not one place, and it is not one environment. It is not even one forest in the way we usually think about forests. It is a vast system made up of countless overlapping systems, each one changing, shifting, and responding to forces that are often invisible until you're already inside them. The Amazon rainforest covers an area larger than the contiguous United States. It stretches across 9 countries. It contains more plant and animal species than any other land ecosystem on Earth. It influences global weather patterns, rainfall on other continents, and even the chemistry of the atmosphere itself. And yet, despite centuries of expeditions, decades of satellite imagery, and thousands of scientific studies, no one can claim to truly know it in full. Not in the way we understand cities, roads, or even oceans. There is always more unmapped territory, more undocumented species, more regions that have barely been observed, let alone understood. At first glance, this seems strange. We live in an age where technology promises visibility. Satellites orbit constantly. Drones can fly where humans cannot. Sensors can measure temperature, moisture, and movement in real time. With all of this, how could such a massive region remain only partially explored? The answer is not a single obstacle, but a collection of limits that stack on top of each other, quietly but relentlessly. One of the first misconceptions is the idea that exploration is simply about going somewhere and looking around. That works in environments where the landscape stays still long enough to be observed. The Amazon does not behave that way. Rivers shift their courses, floodplains expand and contract, forests grow over clearings in a matter of years. What was open ground during one expedition may be dense vegetation by the time someone returns. Paths disappear, landmarks change, even the forest floor itself is unstable, shaped by roots, decay, and constant biological activity. Then there is scale. Humans are not good at intuitively understanding scale beyond a certain point. On a map, the Amazon looks like a single green mass. In reality, it contains millions of square kilometers of terrain, much of it accessible only by boat, small aircraft, or long treks on foot. Travelling even short distances can take days. Supplying expeditions becomes a logistical puzzle. Fuel, food, medical equipment, and communication tools all have to survive heat, humidity, insects, and water. Every step forward requires energy, planning, and risk. But even if logistics were simple, the forest itself resists observation. Dense canopy blocks light and obscures visibility from above. From the ground, sight lines are short. You might see only a few meters in any direction. Sound behaves differently, absorbed and scattered by layers of vegetation. Orientation becomes difficult. GPS signals weaken or disappear beneath thick foliage. Compasses are affected by local conditions. What seems like forward progress can turn into slow circling without realizing it. There's also a deeper issue, one that doesn't involve technology or endurance at all. The Amazon is not an empty place waiting to be explored. It is home. Thousands of indigenous communities live within it, many with limited or no contact with the outside world. Their presence complicates the idea of exploration in an important way. To explore the Amazon fully would mean entering lands where people have lived sustainably for generations, often deliberately avoiding detection to protect their way of life. Respecting that choice places limits on how far exploration should go. And then there's time. Not time measured by clocks, but time measured by processes. The Amazon operates on cycles that don't align neatly with human schedules. Seasonal floods transform landscapes completely. Some regions are underwater for months each year. Other areas dry out and become temporarily accessible. Animals migrate, plants bloom and decay, insect populations rise and fall. To understand any single part of the forest requires repeated observation across years, sometimes decades. A brief visit captures only a snapshot, not the system. Even scientific knowledge accumulates slowly here. New species are often identified from a single specimen, sometimes already dead by the time it's studied. Many organisms are known only by traces, sounds, or brief sightings. Some may exist only in very specific microhabitats, disappearing if conditions shift slightly. This makes comprehensive cataloguing nearly impossible. Every answer raises new questions. There's also the matter of human perception. We tend to think of exploration as progress, as a linear path toward completion. But the Amazon does not move in straight lines. It doesn't offer clear milestones. You don't reach a point where you can say it has been explored and move on. The deeper you go, the more complex it becomes. Knowledge doesn't simplify the forest, it complicates it. This is why the Amazon often feels more like a presence than a place. It's something that surrounds, absorbs, and outlasts attempts to fully grasp it. You can study parts of it, live within it, travel through it, but it never fully reveals itself. Not because it is hiding, but because it is too large, too dynamic, and too alive to be reduced to complete understanding, and that realization sets the tone for everything that follows. The story of why we can't truly explore the Amazon isn't about failure or limitation in a negative sense. It's about recognizing the boundary between human systems and a natural system that operates on its own terms. As we move forward, we'll look at maps that mislead us, technologies that fall short, and assumptions that quietly shape how we think about exploration itself. Each layer adds context, not closure. And as the forest slowly comes into focus, it becomes clear that not everything is meant to be fully known, only approached with care, patience, and a certain amount of humility. The journey doesn't stop here, it simply continues, deeper into the green. When people think about the Amazon, the first thing they often imagine is a map. A familiar shape filled in with green, crossed by a thick blue line labelled Amazon River, bordered neatly by country names and thin black lines. The map feels authoritative, clean, finished. It suggests that the place has been captured, reduced, and understood. That impression is powerful, and it's also deeply misleading. Maps give us confidence. They imply completeness even when they are built on partial information. With the Amazon, this confidence is especially dangerous because the map hides far more than it reveals. It flattens a living system into symbols and colours that behave nicely on paper or screens, while the real landscape refuses to behave at all. Most maps of the Amazon are created from satellite imagery. From high above, the forest looks continuous, almost uniform. Vast green textures stretch across the basin, broken only by rivers and occasional lighter patches where human activity has cleared land. This view encourages the idea that the Amazon is a single thing. One forest, one challenge, one area waiting to be crossed, studied or preserved. But that view exists only from far away. The closer you get, the more the illusion falls apart. On the ground, the Amazon is fragmented in ways maps cannot easily represent. The forest is divided into countless ecosystems layered side by side. There are floodplain forests that spend half the year underwater. There are terra firma forests that rarely flood at all. There are whitewater rivers rich in nutrients and blackwater rivers that are acidic and low in minerals. Each supports different species, different soil chemistry, and different survival strategies. Two areas that look identical on a map may function in entirely different ways when you step into them. Maps also assume permanence. Roads stay where they are. Rivers follow predictable paths. Boundaries remain fixed. None of this is true in the Amazon. Rivers regularly change course, sometimes dramatically. Over time, a river can carve a new path, abandon an old one, and leave behind oxbow lakes that slowly fill with sediment and vegetation. What was once a main channel becomes isolated water. What was dry forest becomes floodplain. On a human timescale, this feels chaotic. On a geological and ecological timescale, it is simply how the system works. When a map marks a river in blue, it suggests stability. In reality, the river is a moving force that reshapes the land year after year. Entire islands appear and disappear. Sandbars form, migrate, and dissolve. Settlements built along riverbanks may find themselves suddenly far from water or dangerously close to erosion. The map does not show this movement. It freezes the river in a single pose and calls it accurate. Political borders are another fiction layered onto the Amazon. Lines drawn by governments slice the forest into nations, regions, protected areas, and concessions. On a map, these borders look firm. In the forest, they are meaningless. Trees do not recognize national boundaries. Animals do not stop at customs checkpoints. Rivers cross borders without changing their behavior. Indigenous territories often overlap with multiple countries, while ecosystems flow uninterrupted across lines humans insist on enforcing. This disconnect matters because it shapes how exploration is planned. Expeditions often rely on mapped routes, expected terrain, and assumed accessibility. When those assumptions fail, plans unravel quickly. A mapped trail may be nothing more than a seasonal footpath used decades ago. A marked clearing may no longer exist. A navigable river may be too shallow, too fast, or too blocked to travel safely at a given time of year. There is also the issue of scale distortion. On a map, distances appear manageable. A few centimetres between 2 points translates into hundreds of kilometres on the ground. That distance is not empty space. It is filled with obstacles, dense vegetation, swamps, steep banks, insects, heat, humidity. Every kilometre demands effort. The map does not communicate exhaustion. It does not communicate how slow progress becomes when every step requires clearing, balancing, or detouring. Elevation is another subtle deception. Much of the Amazon basin appears flat on maps, and in a broad sense it is. But flat does not mean easy. Slight changes in elevation can mean the difference between dry ground and standing water. A rise of a metre can separate a livable area from a swamp. These micro-elevations shape where plants grow, where animals nest, and where humans can travel. Most maps smooth these details away, presenting a uniform surface that does not exist in practice. Then there is the problem of what maps choose not to show. Many regions of the Amazon are intentionally left vague. Sensitive areas, indigenous territories, and regions with limited data are often generalized or obscured. This is sometimes done for protection, sometimes due to lack of information, and sometimes for political reasons. The result is a visual silence that suggests emptiness rather than complexity. This apparent emptiness has had real consequences. For centuries, explorers and colonizers treated blank spaces on maps as invitations. If a place was not labelled, it was assumed to be unused or unclaimed. In the Amazon, this assumption led to violence, displacement, and ecological damage. The forest was not empty. It was simply not mapped in a way outsiders recognised. Even modern maps continue this pattern in quieter ways. Satellite imagery can detect deforestation, fires, and large-scale changes, but it struggles with subtle human presence. Small villages hidden beneath canopy, seasonal camps, paths that exist only during certain times of year. These are often invisible from above. The map shows green, and green is interpreted as untouched, even when people have lived there sustainably for generations. Technology has improved resolution, but not understanding. High-definition images reveal more detail, but they still lack context. A clearing could be a natural gap caused by fallen trees or a carefully managed agricultural plot. A straight line through the forest could be a river, a logging road, or a shadow. Without local knowledge, interpretation becomes guesswork. This is where the idea of exploration becomes tangled with perspective. From outside, the Amazon appears unexplored because it has not been mapped according to external systems of knowledge. From within, it is deeply known. Indigenous communities navigate the forest using landmarks that do not appear on maps. They read subtle changes in vegetation, soil, and sound. They understand seasonal rhythms that determine when and where travel is possible. Their mental maps are dynamic, responsive, and precise in ways no satellite image can replicate. But these internal maps rarely translate well into Western cartography. They rely on relationships rather than coordinates. A place might be described by what grows there, what animals pass through, or what stories are associated with it. These descriptions carry practical information, but they resist simplification. When forced into conventional maps, much of their meaning is lost. This mismatch creates another barrier to exploration. Outsiders rely on tools that flatten complexity, while the environment demands tools that respond to it. When those tools fail, frustration follows. Routes disappear, predictions fail. The forest feels deceptive, even hostile, when in reality it is behaving exactly as it always has. There is also the issue of time lag. Maps are always behind reality. By the time data is collected, processed, and published, the landscape may already have changed. In a place as dynamic as the Amazon, this lag matters. Seasonal flooding can transform accessibility in weeks. Human activity can alter terrain in months. Ecological succession can reclaim cleared land in years. A map created even a decade ago may already be unreliable. This constant change undermines the idea of completion. You cannot finish mapping the Amazon because the thing you are mapping refuses to stay still. Every update replaces an outdated version with another version that will soon be outdated as well. Exploration becomes a process without an endpoint. The psychological effect of maps should not be underestimated either. When a place is mapped, it feels owned, known, controlled. This sense of control encourages exploitation. If something is understood, it can be managed. If it can be managed, it can be used. The Amazon resists this chain of reasoning not through secrecy, but through scale and complexity. The map suggests control where none truly exists. This is why so many attempts to manage or explore the Amazon fail to meet expectations. Policies are written based on simplified representations. Expeditions are planned around assumptions that hold only on paper. When reality intrudes, it is labelled unpredictable rather than acknowledged as misrepresented. And yet maps remain useful. They are not lies in the sense of being intentionally false. They are lies in the sense of being incomplete. They tell a partial truth that becomes misleading when treated as the whole story. They are abstractions, and abstractions are fragile when applied to systems that thrive on nuance. Understanding this limitation is a quiet but necessary step in understanding why the Amazon remains beyond full exploration. It is not hidden behind mystery. It is exposed to view in a way that tempts overconfidence. The map invites us in, promising clarity, while the forest waits patiently to demonstrate that clarity is not the same as comprehension. As we move forward, this tension between representation and reality becomes more pronounced. The map is only the first layer of simplification. Beneath it lies a scale that resists intuition, a vastness that stretches beyond what human senses evolved to handle comfortably. And it is within that scale, not the lines on paper, that the true limits of exploration begin to emerge. There is a quiet moment that many people experience the first time they truly confront the scale of the Amazon, and it usually arrives after the map stops being useful. It happens when distances stop feeling like numbers and start feeling like time. Hours of movement with no visible change, days that pass without reaching anything that feels like a destination. The realization settles in slowly that the forest is not just large, but large in a way the human mind is poorly equipped to understand. Humans are good at certain scales. We understand rooms, streets, neighborhoods. We can intuitively grasp a mountain, a lake, even a city sprawling across a horizon. But there is a threshold beyond which scale stops being something we feel and becomes something we can only calculate. The Amazon lives far beyond that threshold. It is not simply big, it is vast in a way that breaks intuition. To say the Amazon rainforest covers more than 5 million square kilometers is accurate, but meaningless to the senses. Numbers like that do not translate into experience. Even comparisons struggle. You can say it is larger than most countries, larger than the European Union, larger than the continental United States, and still, the mind does not really adjust. The brain nods politely and moves on, unchanged. True understanding would require living inside that space long enough for its size to become personal, and very few people ever do. When explorers, scientists, or researchers enter the Amazon, they do not experience it as a whole. They experience fragments, a stretch of river, a patch of forest, a research station surrounded by trees in every direction. These fragments feel immersive, even overwhelming, but they're still only tiny pieces of a system so large that those pieces barely register against it. It is like studying the ocean by examining a glass of water and then being asked to imagine the entire sea. This disconnect between fragment and whole is one of the main reasons exploration never adds up to completeness. Every expedition adds detail, but that detail is swallowed by the scale around it. The more you learn, the more obvious it becomes how much remains untouched. Movement itself becomes deceptive. On foot, progress through dense rainforest can be measured in hundreds of meters per hour. Thick vegetation forces detours. Fallen trees block paths. Swamps slow movement to a crawl. Rivers, which seem like highways on maps, may be impassable due to rapids, debris, or seasonal water levels. A journey that looks short on paper may take weeks in reality. During that time, the forest continues in every direction, unchanged by your presence. From the air, the illusion reverses. Flying over the Amazon compresses scale artificially. Hours of flight pass over uninterrupted green, making it feel uniform and continuous. This creates a sense that the forest is repetitive, that once you've seen one part, you've seen it all. This too is wrong. Beneath the canopy, conditions change constantly. Soil composition shifts, species composition changes, water availability varies, microclimates form and dissolve. The sameness is an artifact of distance, not reality. The river system adds another layer of scale confusion. The Amazon River alone is over 6,000 kilometers long, and that length does not include its countless tributaries. The river network is so extensive that it drains water from nearly half of South America. Trying to explore the Amazon by following its rivers is like trying to understand a city by walking every street, alley, and drainage pipe simultaneously. You could spend a lifetime moving along waterways and still miss enormous portions of the basin. Seasonality stretches scale further. During the wet season, vast areas flood, turning forest into temporary waterways. Travel routes change. Areas that were accessible become submerged. Other areas become reachable only by boat. Then the water recedes, revealing land altered by months underwater. What you explored last season may not exist in the same form the next. Scale here is not just spatial, it is temporal. The forest you see is never the forest as a whole, only the forest at this moment. Human bodies are not designed for this kind of environment over long periods. Heat and humidity tax endurance. Insects demand constant attention. Illness becomes a risk. Injuries heal slowly. Supplies degrade. Every limitation of the body becomes magnified when distances are long and assistance is far away. Scale turns small problems into serious ones simply by removing quick solutions. This physical strain affects perception. When energy is spent on survival, there is less left for observation. The forest becomes something to move through rather than something to understand. This is not a failure of will or intelligence. It is a natural consequence of operating at the edge of human capacity. Exploration demands attention, but the environment demands it too, and it always wins that competition. Even technology struggles with scale. Sensors cover limited areas. Drones have finite range and battery life. Satellites provide broad views but lack depth. To monitor the Amazon comprehensively would require a density of observation that is practically impossible to maintain. Gaps remain, not because of neglect, but because coverage at that scale is unmanageable. Scale also distorts memory. Days blur together. Locations become hard to distinguish. Without clear landmarks, the mind struggles to anchor experiences. This makes detailed recall difficult. Notes become essential, yet taking them is often impractical under constant environmental pressure. Knowledge gained can be fragmented, incomplete, or difficult to contextualize later. There is a psychological cost as well. Vastness can induce a sense of insignificance. This is sometimes described as awe, sometimes as disorientation. In the Amazon, this feeling is constant. The forest does not respond to human presence. It does not open up. It does not reveal itself gradually. It simply continues. For some, this is humbling. For others, it is unsettling. Either way, it shapes how exploration unfolds. Scale also challenges the idea of coverage. In smaller environments, you can reasonably say you have explored an area. You have seen its boundaries. You have traversed its interior. In the Amazon, boundaries are abstract. The forest does not end cleanly. It transitions into other ecosystems gradually. Even defining where the Amazon begins and ends is a matter of interpretation. Without clear edges, exploration has no natural stopping point. This absence of edges feeds into the illusion of incompleteness. No matter how much is explored, it never feels finished because there is always more forest beyond the last known point. Each discovery opens new questions, not just about what lies ahead, but about how much lies ahead. Indigenous knowledge offers an important contrast here. Many communities understand scale differently. Their relationship to the forest is not about covering territory, but about navigating networks of meaningful places. They do not need to know every square kilometre to live successfully within the system. Their understanding is deep rather than broad. It is relational rather than exhaustive. Western exploration often seeks breadth first. How much can we cover? How much can we map? How much can we catalogue? In the Amazon, this approach runs into diminishing returns quickly. Covering more ground does not necessarily yield more understanding. Sometimes it yields less, as attention is spread thin and context is lost. This mismatch between methods and environment reinforces the sense that the Amazon is resistant to exploration. It is not actively resisting. It is simply operating at a scale that makes certain human strategies ineffective. The forest does not need to hide. Its size alone does the work. As we continue deeper into this question, scale becomes the foundation for every other limitation. Technology, perception, memory, and even language are shaped by it. The Amazon is not just large, it is large in a way that demands humility. It reminds us that understanding does not always come from expansion. Sometimes it comes from accepting that some systems are too vast to be fully grasped from the outside. And within that vastness, another challenge quietly waits. The forest does not just stretch across space, it actively conceals what exists within it, not through secrecy, but through density. Green that does not open, but closes in. The Amazon is often introduced through its river, as if the forest was something attached to water rather than shaped by it. From a distance, that framing seems reasonable. The Amazon River is immense, dominant, and visually clear on any map. It looks like a spine running through green. But this idea quickly falls apart when you spend time within the system itself. The Amazon is not defined by one river. It is defined by a living network of water that behaves less like infrastructure and more like a restless organism. There is no single Amazon river in practice. There is a shifting hierarchy of channels, tributaries, floodplains, seasonal lakes, temporary streams, and submerged forests that appear and disappear depending on rainfall, geography, and time of year. What looks stable on paper is, on the ground, constantly rearranging itself. Routes change, land becomes water, water becomes land. Familiar paths vanish without warning. This instability alone makes true exploration extraordinarily difficult. Rivers are usually seen as reliable guides. They offer direction, they offer transport, they promise consistency. In the Amazon, rivers offer none of these things for long. A channel that is deep and navigable one year may become shallow or blocked the next. A riverbank used as a reference point may erode away entirely. Islands form, migrate, and dissolve. The landscape you navigate is not waiting for you to learn it. It is actively rewriting itself. The scale of this river system is difficult to grasp without living inside it. The Amazon basin contains the largest drainage system on Earth. Tens of thousands of tributaries feed into it. Some are wide enough to resemble seas. Others are narrow, dark channels barely wider than a canoe. Many are unnamed. Many are unmapped. Some exist only seasonally, flowing during heavy rains and disappearing during dry months. Yet all of them are connected, influencing water levels, sediment movement, and ecological conditions far beyond their immediate surroundings. Water in the Amazon does not stay neatly contained. During the wet season, rivers overflow their banks and spread across vast floodplains. Entire forests become submerged, sometimes under several meters of water. Fish swim between tree trunks. Boats pass through what will later be dry forest floor. Settlements adapt by building on stilts or floating structures. Then, as the dry season returns, the water retreats, leaving behind nutrient-rich sediment and reshaped terrain. This cycle repeats every year, but never in exactly the same way. Rainfall patterns shift. Some years bring heavier floods, others bring drought. Climate variations upstream affect conditions hundreds of kilometers away. There is no fixed rhythm to rely on, only general tendencies. Planning exploration around these cycles requires flexibility that rigid schedules cannot provide. Navigation becomes an exercise in constant adjustment. A route chosen based on last season's conditions may be impassable now. What appears to be open water may hide submerged obstacles. What looks shallow may suddenly drop. Currents shift unpredictably, influenced by rainfall far beyond the horizon. Even experienced river travellers must remain alert at all times, reading subtle cues in watercolour, flow speed, and debris patterns. Sediment plays a quiet but crucial role here. The Amazon carries more sediment than any other river system on the planet. This sediment shapes everything it touches. It builds new land, it fills old channels, it alters flow paths. Over time, it redraws the map from within. Whitewater rivers rich in sediment support fertile floodplains. Blackwater rivers, low in nutrients, create entirely different ecological conditions. These differences determine where plants grow, where animals gather, and where humans can live. From an exploration standpoint, this means that understanding one part of the river system does not guarantee understanding another. Each tributary behaves differently. Each floodplain responds uniquely. The system cannot be generalized without losing accuracy. Knowledge becomes local, situational, and temporary. There is also the issue of visibility. Rivers are often assumed to provide clear lines of sight. In the Amazon, visibility is limited. Water is often opaque, stained dark by organic matter or clouded with sediment. What lies beneath the surface remains hidden. Hazards cannot always be seen until they are encountered. This uncertainty slows movement and increases risk. The riverbanks themselves are unstable. Erosion is constant. A bank that looks solid may collapse under weight. Trees fall into the water, creating obstacles that shift position with currents. These fallen trees can block channels or create new ones. What was once a straight path becomes a maze of debris and detours. For those attempting to document or map these waterways, the challenge compounds. Any representation risks becoming outdated quickly. A map drawn today may be inaccurate next year. Even high-resolution satellite imagery struggles to keep up with these changes, especially beneath forest canopy and in narrow channels. The result is a persistent gap between representation and reality. This fluidity affects more than logistics. It shapes ecosystems in ways that complicate scientific study. Species distributions shift with water levels. Breeding grounds appear and disappear. Migration patterns change. A species observed in one location may be absent the next season, not because it has vanished, but because the conditions it depends on have moved. Human communities adapt to this in ways that reflect deep understanding. Indigenous groups navigate the river system with knowledge passed down through generations. They know when certain routes are usable. They recognize subtle signs that indicate changes in water behavior. Their navigation is based on relationship and experience rather than fixed coordinates. This knowledge is precise, but it does not translate easily into external systems. Attempts to impose fixed infrastructure onto this river system often fail. Roads wash away, bridges collapse, permanent ports become unusable. Even large-scale engineering projects struggle to maintain relevance in the face of constant change. The river system resists being pinned down. Exploration, in the traditional sense, relies on repetition. You go somewhere, you document it, you return and refine your understanding. In the Amazon, repetition is unreliable. The place you return to may no longer exist in the same form. This undermines accumulation of knowledge. Each visit feels like a first visit, even when it is not. There is also a psychological effect to navigating a system that never repeats itself. Familiarity does not bring comfort in the usual way. Confidence must remain provisional. Certainty becomes dangerous. Explorers learn to expect surprise, to plan for uncertainty, and to accept that mastery is temporary at best. This stands in contrast to many other environments where exploration eventually leads to predictability. Mountains do not rearrange themselves annually. Deserts shift slowly by comparison. Oceans are vast, but their patterns are studied extensively and follow recognizable cycles. The Amazon's river system operates on a faster, messier timescale. This messiness is not chaos. It is order expressed through movement. It follows rules, but those rules are distributed across space and time in ways that make them difficult to isolate. Understanding emerges only through long-term observation, and even then, it remains incomplete. As a result, the Amazon cannot be explored in the sense of being finalized. There is no point at which the river system becomes fully known. Every attempt to grasp it encounters change. Every effort to fix it in place encounters flow. This reality feeds into the broader question of why the Amazon remains beyond full exploration. The rivers are not just obstacles or pathways. They are active participants in shaping what can be known and when. They ensure that the forest never presents the same face twice, and beyond the water itself lies another layer of resistance. Even when the rivers allow passage, the forest they feed does not open willingly. It absorbs, obscures, and conceals, turning green into a barrier rather than a backdrop. Green is usually associated with openness, fields, hills, life spread out under the sky. In the Amazon, green means the opposite. It does not invite the eye forward, it closes it in. It absorbs distance, swallows edges, and makes space feel smaller than it really is. This is one of the quiet reasons the Amazon resists exploration. Visibility, the most basic tool of understanding, is taken away almost immediately. From above, the forest looks like a surface, a textured blanket, continuous, calm, and deceptively readable. From within, that surface turns into layers upon layers of obstruction. Leaves overlap leaves, vines loop and tangle, branches interlock at different heights. The canopy blocks most direct sunlight, leaving the forest floor dim even at midday. Vision becomes short range. You stop seeing landscapes and start seeing obstacles. In many environments, exploration relies on sight. You look ahead, choose a direction, adjust as you go. In the Amazon, you rarely see far enough to make those decisions confidently. 10 meters can be optimistic. Often, visibility is reduced to just a few steps. The forest does not provide vistas. It provides walls made of living matter. This limited visibility changes how movement works. Every step forward requires negotiation. You do not walk so much as thread yourself through space. Progress is slow not because the ground is always difficult, but because the air itself feels crowded. Branches catch clothing, thorns scrape skin, vines pull back when cut, snapping unpredictably. Even moving your arms freely can be a challenge. The density is not uniform. Some patches open briefly, only to close again without warning. A clearing might suggest ease, but it rarely lasts. The forest constantly rearranges its density, responding to light gaps, fallen trees, soil moisture, and animal movement. There is no consistent pattern to rely on. The idea that the forest can be cleared misunderstands how quickly it reclaims space. This has deep consequences for exploration. Observation becomes fragmentary. You see what is immediately in front of you, but little beyond that. Patterns are hard to detect when you cannot step back far enough to view them. Understanding becomes local rather than global. Knowledge is gained in pieces that resist easy connection. Sound does not help as much as one might expect. Dense vegetation absorbs and scatters noise. Direction becomes difficult to judge. A sound may seem close when it is far away, or distant when it is near. Animal calls echo unpredictably. Human voices fade quickly. Communication over even short distances becomes unreliable. Teams spread out risk losing contact altogether. This sensory compression affects the mind as well as the body. When your world shrinks to what you can see and hear immediately around you, planning becomes harder. The future feels vague. Orientation relies more on memory and guesswork than on visual confirmation. Fatigue amplifies this effect. The forest does not need to disorient actively. Its structure does the work. Even scientific observation suffers under this green density. Many species are rarely seen directly. They're identified by sounds, tracks, or traces. Leaves show signs of feeding. Soil reveals burrows, calls echo from unseen heights. The forest reveals life indirectly, forcing inference rather than direct study. This makes certainty difficult. Presence is suggested rather than confirmed. Plants themselves complicate matters. The Amazon's biodiversity means that vegetation is not repetitive. species change subtly over distance. Some areas are dominated by a few types of trees, others are mosaics of hundreds of species within a small area. Without specialised knowledge, it is difficult to tell whether you are in a new zone or simply seeing variation within the same one. This complexity overwhelms simple classification. Identifying plants requires close inspection, often of flowers or fruit that may not be present at the time. Leaves alone are rarely enough. Many species look similar until examined in detail. In the field, under pressure, mistakes are easy. Records become uncertain. Data requires constant verification. The forest also hides itself vertically. Life is distributed across multiple layers. The canopy hosts species that never come to the ground. The understory supports different organisms entirely. The forest floor has its own inhabitants, many of them nocturnal or hidden. To truly observe the Amazon, one would need to occupy all these layers at once, something humans are poorly equipped to do. Climbing into the canopy is dangerous and resource-intensive. Building platforms or towers helps only locally. Drones struggle beneath the canopy. Cameras have limited range. As a result, entire communities of organisms remain partially observed at best. The forest's most active zones are often the hardest to access. Green also hides history. Evidence of past human activity disappears quickly. Paths vanish. Structures decay. Soil is reworked by roots and insects. What might look like untouched forest may once have been managed, cultivated, or inhabited. Without careful excavation and analysis, these traces are easy to miss. The forest erases footprints efficiently. This erasure has fueled the myth of the Amazon as pristine wilderness, untouched by humans. In reality, many areas bear subtle signs of long-term human interaction. Modified soils, shifts in species composition, managed groves. These signs are not obvious. They are woven into the green rather than standing apart from it. Seeing them requires a trained eye and patience. The hiding quality of the forest also affects danger perception. Threats are rarely visible from a distance. Animals appear suddenly. Terrain changes without warning. Water may be deeper than it looks. Plants may be toxic or irritating without obvious signs. The environment does not advertise risk clearly. Caution must be constant. This constant vigilance drains attention. Energy that could be used for observation is spent on navigation and safety. Over time, this narrows focus further. Exploration becomes about endurance rather than discovery. The forest dictates priorities. From a distance, the Amazon looks invitingly green. From within, that green becomes a barrier. It does not reveal what lies ahead. It does not offer orientation. It does not provide overview. It encloses, absorbs, and conceals. This is not hostility. It is simply the natural outcome of a system optimized for growth, not visibility. Understanding this changes how we think about exploration. The Amazon is not hiding secrets behind a veil waiting to be lifted. It is openly complex in a way that resists being reduced. Its green is not decoration, it is structure. And that structure ensures that knowledge arrives slowly, unevenly, and always incomplete. As the forest closes in visually, another illusion quietly falls away. The idea that this green represents emptiness, that beneath the canopy lies unused space. In reality, what is hidden is not absence, but presence layered so densely that it becomes difficult to separate at all. There is a powerful idea that clings to the Amazon, one that has shaped centuries of decisions without ever needing to be spoken out loud. The idea that beneath all that green lies emptiness, vast unused space, wilderness in the purest sense, a place without people, without history, without ownership. This idea has been repeated so often in maps, books, films, and policy language that it feels almost natural, and yet it is one of the most misleading assumptions ever applied to the forest. The Amazon has never been empty. What it has been is misunderstood. the illusion of emptiness begins with visibility. From above, the forest looks uninterrupted. There are no grids of streets, no clusters of lights at night, no obvious markers of dense population. Compared to cities or agricultural land, it appears quiet, unoccupied, untouched. But this comparison relies on a very narrow definition of presence. It assumes that human existence must look a certain way to count. Permanent structures, clearings, straight lines, regular patterns. When those signs are absent, absence itself is assumed. Inside the forest, human presence takes different forms. Many indigenous communities have developed ways of living that leave light traces rather than heavy scars. Homes are built from materials that return to the forest when abandoned. Paths follow natural contours and disappear when not used. Agriculture is often dispersed, rotational, and integrated into the ecosystem rather than imposed upon it. These practices are not accidental. They are the result of long adaptation to an environment that punishes overexposure and rewards balance. From a satellite, these lives are easy to miss. From a map, they often do not exist at all. This invisibility has consequences. When a place is seen as empty, it becomes available for extraction, available for settlement, available for control. Throughout history, the Amazon has been treated as a frontier not because it lacked people, but because the people who lived there did not fit external expectations of occupation. Their presence did not register within the systems used to define land use and ownership. Early explorers reinforced this illusion, often unintentionally. Expeditions followed rivers and major routes, encountering communities clustered along waterways while missing countless others deeper in the forest. Reports described long stretches of apparent emptiness between settlements, interpreting silence as absence rather than as a different mode of habitation. Over time, these accounts solidified into a narrative of sparsity. Colonial administrations built policies around this narrative. Land was claimed, divided, and assigned under the assumption that it was unused. Later, development projects followed the same logic. Roads were cut through regions labelled as vacant. Forest was cleared for agriculture and industry. Resistance from indigenous communities was framed as obstruction rather than defence of long-held territory. Even today, the language of emptiness persists in subtler forms. Phrases like untouched wilderness and virgin forest appear in media and marketing. They are meant to inspire awe, but they carry an implication that erases human history. They suggest that the Amazon exists outside of time, waiting for discovery, rather than as a place shaped by thousands of years of human interaction. Archaeology has been slowly dismantling this illusion. Beneath the forest floor, evidence of large, complex societies continues to emerge. Engineered soils enriched with charcoal and nutrients, remains of roads, canals, and earthworks, traces of urban planning hidden beneath centuries of growth. These findings reveal that parts of the Amazon once supported dense populations with sophisticated land management practices. The forest we see today is not simply nature reclaiming untouched land. In many areas, it is a regrown landscape shaped by past human activity. Species composition reflects selective planting and management. Certain trees appear in patterns that suggest deliberate cultivation. What looks wild is often the result of long-term coevolution between humans and environment. This challenges the basic premise of exploration. If a place has been lived in, known, and shaped, then what does it mean to explore it? For whom is it unknown? The answer depends on perspective. To outsiders, the Amazon may appear mysterious and empty. To those who live within it, it is densely populated with meaning, memory, and knowledge. The illusion of emptiness also affects how danger is perceived. A place without people is assumed to be hostile by default. This reinforces the idea of the Amazon as something to be conquered or survived rather than understood. Stories of danger focus on animals, disease, and isolation, often ignoring the reality that millions of people have lived here successfully for generations. Isolation itself is relative. The forest may be isolated from global infrastructure, but within it exist networks of communication, trade, and kinship that operate independently of external systems. Rivers function as highways. Knowledge moves through oral traditions. Alliances form across distances that seem insurmountable to outsiders. These networks are largely invisible unless you know how to look for them. The idea of empty wilderness also simplifies the ethical landscape. If no one is there, then no one is harmed by intrusion. This logic has justified environmental destruction under the guise of development. It has allowed exploitation to proceed without meaningful consultation. It has framed resistance as inconvenience rather than as a defense of home. Exploration, when built on this illusion, becomes extractive by default. It seeks to take knowledge, resources, or experience from a place assumed to have no voice. This approach fails not only morally, but practically. It overlooks local expertise. It misreads environmental signals. It underestimates resilience and adaptability. There is also a psychological comfort in imagining emptiness. It allows the Amazon to exist as a canvas for projection, adventure, escape, purity, danger. The forest becomes a backdrop for external narratives rather than a subject with its own. This makes it easier to talk about exploration as an abstract goal rather than as an interaction with living systems and societies. But the forest does not conform to that abstraction. It responds to intrusion. It reacts to disruption. It remembers through ecological change. When land is cleared, species composition shifts. When rivers are altered, flood patterns change. These responses ripple outward, affecting communities far beyond the initial site of impact. Recognizing that the Amazon is not empty forces a re-evaluation of what exploration means. It becomes less about first contact and more about listening, less about coverage and more about context. This shift is uncomfortable for traditions built on discovery and conquest, but it aligns more closely with reality. There are still regions of the Amazon that remain little studied by external science. There are still species yet to be documented. There are still processes not fully understood. But these unknowns exist within a landscape that is already full, not blank. The forest does not lack presence. It lacks translation. This misunderstanding feeds directly into the limits of exploration. You cannot fully explore a place if you do not recognize who and what is already there. You cannot map knowledge that does not fit your categories. You cannot claim understanding while ignoring lived experience. As the illusion of emptiness dissolves, another layer of complexity comes into focus. The forest is not only occupied, it is active. It adapts, communicates, and responds in ways that challenge human assumptions about intelligence and agency. And this living responsiveness introduces a new kind of boundary, one that is not about distance or density, but about interaction itself. For a long time, the idea of lost cities in the Amazon was treated as fantasy. Stories told by early explorers were dismissed as exaggerations, misunderstandings, or outright fabrications. Reports of large settlements, wide roads, and organized societies deep in the forest did not fit the prevailing image of the Amazon as sparsely populated wilderness. Without stone ruins rising above the canopy, without monuments visible from afar, these accounts were quietly set aside. The forest, it was assumed, could not support complexity on that scale. What this assumption overlooked was the nature of the forest itself, and the way it treats human presence over time. The Amazon is exceptionally good at erasing. Not dramatically, not violently, but steadily and thoroughly. Structures made from wood decay quickly. Earthworks soften, slump, and are reshaped by rain. Paths disappear beneath leaf litter. Roots grow through everything. Insects dismantle what remains. Within decades, visible traces of occupation can fade into the surrounding green. Within centuries, they can become nearly indistinguishable from natural formations, unless you know exactly what to look for. This is why the absence of obvious ruins was misread as evidence of absence. Exploration focused on what could be seen easily, and the Amazon does not reward that approach. Its history is not written in stone. It is written in soil chemistry, vegetation patterns, and subtle alterations to landforms that blend into the forest rather than standing apart from it. Only in recent decades has this begun to change. Advances in archaeology, combined with new technologies, have revealed a different picture. Beneath the forest canopy lie the remains of complex societies that once managed large territories. These were not small, isolated groups struggling against an overwhelming environment. They were organised populations with systems of agriculture, infrastructure, and regional coordination. One of the most striking discoveries has been the presence of engineered soils known as terra preta. These dark, fertile soils do not occur naturally at scale in the Amazon. They were created deliberately by human activity, enriched with charcoal, organic waste, and nutrients over long periods. Areas containing terra preta are often far more productive than surrounding soils, capable of supporting intensive agriculture. Their distribution suggests long-term settlement and land management rather than temporary occupation. Alongside these soils, researchers have uncovered evidence of roads, canals, and geometric earthworks. Some of these structures span kilometres, others form intricate patterns visible only from the air. They indicate planning, coordination, and labour investment on a scale previously thought impossible in the region. These were landscapes shaped intentionally, not accidentally. Yet even as this evidence accumulates, much of it remains difficult to interpret. The forest has grown back over these features, obscuring their outlines. What looks like a natural rise in the ground may be the remnants of a causeway. What appears to be a wetland may once have been a managed canal system. Differentiating between natural and human-modified features requires careful analysis and often extensive excavation, which is slow, expensive, and limited in scope. This creates a paradox. The more we learn about past human presence in the Amazon, the more we realise how much has already been lost to visibility. Entire cities may have existed without leaving clear traces accessible to modern observers. Their disappearance does not indicate insignificance. It reflects the environment's capacity to absorb and transform. The vanishing of footprints extends beyond physical structures. Cultural knowledge disappears as well. Languages fade. Oral histories are disrupted by displacement and disease. When communities are destroyed or forced to relocate, their understanding of land, seasons, and ecosystems can be lost within a generation. This loss leaves gaps that no excavation can fill. Early contact between indigenous populations and outsiders was often catastrophic. Diseases spread rapidly. Violence and forced labour decimated communities. Survivors retreated deeper into the forest or adapted in ways that reduced visibility. Settlements became smaller, more dispersed. Some groups chose isolation deliberately as a survival strategy. These choices further reduced the chances that their histories would be recognised or recorded by external observers. As a result, much of what we call exploration has been happening in a landscape already shaped by trauma and erasure. What appears as pristine forest may be the regrowth following collapse. What looks like absence may be the quiet aftermath of disruption. This complicates any attempt to read the land as a neutral record. The forest itself participates in this forgetting. Trees grow over old clearings, roots fracture earthworks, seasonal floods redistribute sediment. Over time, the distinction between natural and human-altered terrain blurs. The Amazon does not preserve ruins, it metabolizes them. This makes exploration difficult in a specific way. You cannot simply arrive and observe what remains. You must reconstruct what is no longer visible. That requires interpretation, inference, and humility. It also requires accepting uncertainty. Many questions will never be answered definitively. The evidence is partial. the context is incomplete. Technologies like airborne laser scanning have helped reveal hidden structures beneath the canopy, briefly peeling back the green to expose geometric patterns below. These discoveries are often described as revelations, but even they come with limitations. They show shape, not function. They reveal layout, not daily life. They offer glimpses rather than narratives. Each new finding raises further questions. How many people lived here? How were resources distributed? How did these societies adapt to environmental change? Why did some systems persist, while others collapsed? Without written records, answers must be inferred indirectly, and inference is always provisional. This provisional nature of knowledge frustrates traditional exploration. It resists closure. You cannot arrive at a final map or a definitive history. Every conclusion remains open to revision as new evidence emerges or old assumptions are challenged. There is also an ethical dimension. As lost cities become visible again through technology, they attract attention. Attention brings risk. Looting, tourism, and development threaten sites that have remained protected precisely because they were hidden. Revealing the past can endanger it in the present. For this reason, some discoveries are deliberately kept vague or undisclosed. Locations are generalized. Details are withheld. Exploration becomes selective, balancing curiosity against protection. This restraint further limits comprehensive understanding, but it is necessary. The idea of vanishing footprints applies equally to the present. Contemporary Indigenous communities continue to leave light traces by design. Their ways of life prioritize flexibility and renewal over permanence. From an external perspective, this makes them easy to overlook. From within the forest, it makes them resilient. This challenges the assumption that history must leave monuments to be real. In the Amazon, continuity is often maintained through practice rather than structure. Knowledge is carried in stories, routines, and relationships. When those are disrupted, the loss is profound, even if the land appears unchanged. Exploration that focuses only on what can be seen misses this deeper layer. It treats visibility as evidence and invisibility as absence. In doing so, it repeats the same mistake that obscured the past for so long. Understanding the Amazon requires a different sensitivity, one that recognizes that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, that silence can be full, that green can cover as much as it reveals. As these lost cities and vanishing footprints slowly re-enter awareness, they alter how the forest is understood. Not as a place waiting to be discovered, but as a place that has already been lived in, shaped, and remembered in ways that resist simple documentation. And this realization feeds into another challenge. Even when we acknowledge the presence of history and intelligence in the Amazon, we often underestimate the forest itself as an active participant. Not just a backdrop for human stories, but a system that senses, responds, and adapts. A living network whose behavior complicates exploration in ways that go beyond terrain or scale. When people talk about intelligence, they usually picture something centralized. A brain, a decision maker, a clear source of control. The Amazon does not offer anything like that. And yet, the longer scientists, ecologists, and communities live within it, the harder it becomes to deny that the forest behaves in ways that resemble a kind of distributed intelligence. Not conscious in a human sense, not intentional in a way that implies thought or desire, but responsive, adaptive, and remarkably coordinated across scales far larger than any single organism. This living responsiveness is one of the least visible and most underestimated reasons the Amazon resists true exploration. At its most basic level, the forest is a web of interactions. Trees exchange nutrients through fungal networks beneath the soil. Plants release chemical signals when damaged, warning neighbouring plants of danger. Insects respond to these signals. Predators respond to insect behaviour. Microbes alter soil chemistry in response to plant waste. Water movement responds to vegetation density. Vegetation density responds to water availability. Nothing operates in isolation. Every action ripples outward. For someone attempting to understand the Amazon as a collection of parts, this interconnectedness becomes overwhelming. You cannot study a tree without studying the soil. You cannot study the soil without studying microbes. You cannot study microbes without understanding moisture, temperature, and root systems. Each layer demands tension, and each layer refuses to stay confined to its category. This creates a problem for exploration, as it is traditionally practiced. Exploration often relies on separation. Divide the system into components, study each one, assemble the results. In the Amazon, the boundaries between components are porous. Effects propagate unpredictably. Cause and effect are often delayed or displaced in space. A change in one area may manifest consequences hundreds of kilometers away, months or years later. Take rainfall, for example. The Amazon does not merely receive rain, it helps create it. Trees release moisture into the atmosphere through transpiration. That moisture contributes to cloud formation, which then produces rain that falls not only locally but across the basin and beyond. This recycling of water means that the forest participates actively in its own climate. Remove enough trees and rainfall patterns change. The system adjusts, but not always in ways humans can predict or control. From the perspective of exploration, this means that the environment you enter is not static. It is responding to past actions, present conditions, and future pressures all at once. The forest you see today is shaped by choices made decades ago. The data you collect may reflect processes already in motion that will not fully reveal themselves until much later. Plants themselves exhibit behaviors that challenge simplistic views. Some trees synchronize flowering across vast areas, overwhelming pollinators with abundance and increasing reproductive success. Others produce fruit at irregular intervals, frustrating seed predators. These strategies emerge from evolutionary pressures, but they operate at scales that feel coordinated rather than random. Animal behavior adds another layer. Many species adjust movement patterns based on subtle environmental cues. Migration routes shift with water levels. Breeding cycles respond to temperature and food availability. Predators alter hunting strategies as prey adapts. These dynamics create a constantly shifting balance that resists long-term prediction. Humans often approach exploration with the assumption that observation does not alter the system being observed. In the Amazon, this assumption fails quickly. Simply entering an area can introduce change. Paths compact soil. Noise alters animal behavior. Presence shifts local dynamics. Even well-intentioned research can disrupt delicate relationships. This sensitivity means that knowledge gained is always entangled with the act of gaining it. You cannot fully separate observer from environment. The forest reacts, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. Over time, this reaction feeds back into what can be observed next. The intelligence of the forest is also expressed through redundancy and resilience. There are multiple species performing similar ecological roles. If one declines, others can compensate. This redundancy makes the system robust, but it also complicates study. Removing or isolating one variable rarely produces clean results. The system adapts around interventions, masking effects and confounding conclusions. From a human standpoint, this adaptability can be frustrating. Experiments yield inconsistent results. Models fail to predict outcomes accurately. Long-term studies are required to tease out patterns, and even then, certainty remains elusive. Indigenous knowledge systems have long recognized this living complexity. Rather than attempting to dominate or simplify the forest, they work within its rhythms. Practices are adjusted based on observation, experience, and feedback. Mistakes are costly, so caution is embedded into culture. Knowledge is contextual, situational, and responsive. This stands in contrast to many external approaches that seek universal rules. The Amazon resists universality. What works in one area may fail in another. What holds true this year may not hold next year. The forest does not reward rigid thinking. The idea of intelligence here is not metaphorical flourish. It reflects the forest's capacity to process information through feedback loops. Conditions change, the system responds. Responses alter future conditions. Over time, patterns emerge that maintain balance within shifting constraints. For exploration, this means that the Amazon is not a passive subject. It is an active participant. It does not simply reveal itself when observed. It negotiates, adapts, and sometimes withdraws. Knowledge is not extracted cleanly. It is co-produced and often contested. This co-production challenges the narrative of mastery. You cannot conquer an intelligent system without destabilizing it, and destabilization undermines understanding. The more forcefully you intervene, the less representative your observations become. The forest you're studying becomes something else. This dynamic is especially apparent when large-scale projects attempt to impose order. Dams alter river flow, triggering cascading effects on fish populations, sediment distribution, and flood cycles. Roads fragment habitats, changing animal movement and plant distribution. These interventions generate data, but that data reflects disturbance rather than baseline behavior. As a result, much of what we know about the Amazon comes from studying how it reacts to stress, rather than how it functions undisturbed. This skews understanding. It highlights vulnerability while obscuring stability. It reveals breaking points without fully capturing equilibrium. The intelligence of the forest also manifests through time. The Amazon remembers, not in a conscious sense, but through ecological memory. Soil composition reflects past vegetation. Species distribution reflects historical disturbances. Fire scars influence future growth patterns. These memories shape present behavior. Exploration that ignores this temporal depth misreads what it sees. A forest recovering from disturbance may appear healthy, but its species composition may differ significantly from an undisturbed system. Without historical context, conclusions remain shallow. This temporal intelligence complicates restoration efforts as well. You cannot simply return the forest to a previous state by replanting trees. The system's history matters. Feedback loops have shifted, new equilibria have formed, restoration becomes negotiation rather than reversal. For those seeking to explore the Amazon fully, this living intelligence sets a fundamental limit. You cannot freeze the system long enough to map it completely. You cannot isolate variables cleanly enough to fully explain it. You cannot observe without influencing. This does not mean understanding is impossible. It means understanding must be partial, adaptive, and ongoing. Knowledge becomes something maintained rather than completed. Exploration becomes participation rather than conquest. And participation requires patience. It requires listening more than measuring. It requires accepting that some processes unfold on timescales longer than human projects allow. Funding cycles end. Research teams rotate. Political priorities shift. The forest continues. This mismatch between human timescales and ecological timescales is one of the quietest barriers to exploration. The Amazon's intelligence is expressed slowly. Patterns reveal themselves over decades. Feedback loops stabilize or destabilize gradually. Short-term observation captures motion but misses meaning. As we press further into the reasons the Amazon cannot be fully explored, this becomes unavoidable. The forest is not an inert space to be filled with data. It is a dynamic system that responds to attention, absorbs disturbance, and reshapes itself continuously. And as adaptive as this intelligence is, it creates another challenge layered on top of all the others. The very tools humans rely on to extend perception and reach begin to fail when faced with an environment that disrupts signals, corrodes equipment, and refuses clear transmission. The forest does not just think in its own way, it interferes with ours. Modern exploration is often framed as a technological problem. If a place is difficult to access, the solution is assumed to be better tools, stronger machines, smarter sensors, faster data processing. From this perspective, the Amazon should be increasingly transparent. Satellites orbit constantly. Drones can fly where people cannot. Sensors can collect data without rest. And yet, despite all this, the forest remains stubbornly opaque. Technology does not simply struggle here. In many cases, it quietly fails. The first problem appears immediately above the forest. The canopy itself is a physical barrier that defeats many observational tools before they ever reach the ground. The Amazon's canopy is dense, layered, and uneven. Leaves overlap at multiple heights. Branches interlock. Gaps are irregular and temporary. From the air, this creates a continuous surface that hides almost everything beneath it. Light struggles to pass through, so do signals. Satellite imagery excels at capturing surfaces. It is far less effective at revealing what lies below them. High-resolution images can show tree crowns, river courses and large clearings, but they cannot easily see understory vegetation, animal movement, soil conditions, or human presence that blends into the forest structure. What technology sees is often limited to the top few meters of a system that extends dozens of meters downward and far beyond in complexity. Radar and laser-based systems have improved this situation somewhat, but even they come with limitations. Signals scatter when they encounter irregular surfaces. Moisture in the air interferes. Dense vegetation absorbs energy. The result is data that requires heavy interpretation and often contains gaps or distortions. What looks precise on a screen may be ambiguous in reality. Once technology is brought beneath the canopy, a different set of problems emerges. Humidity is relentless. Moisture seeps into everything. Electronics corrode. Batteries degrade quickly. Connections fail. Even equipment designed for harsh environments struggles when exposed to constant heat and dampness, without the opportunity to dry out fully. Maintenance becomes a daily battle rather than an occasional task. Power is another constraint. Solar panels, so reliable in open environments, are far less effective under a dense canopy that blocks direct sunlight. Generators require fuel, which is heavy and difficult to transport. Batteries must be recharged or replaced, adding logistical complexity. Every additional device increases dependency on a fragile supply chain that the forest actively complicates. Communication technologies suffer as well. Radio signals weaken quickly in dense vegetation. Line-of-sight transmission is rare. Satellite phones may struggle to connect through layers of leaves and moisture. Data transmission becomes intermittent or impossible. Teams can find themselves technologically isolated, even when surrounded by advanced equipment. Navigation tools are not immune. GPS relies on signals from satellites that can be blocked or distorted by the canopy. Position fixes become inaccurate or unavailable. What works reliably in open terrain becomes unreliable here. Explorers are forced to revert to older methods, using landmarks, memory and experience to orient themselves. Technology becomes a supplement rather than a solution. Drones, often imagined as the answer to inaccessible terrain, face severe limitations. Under the canopy, there is little space to maneuver. Branches and vines create hazards. Visual navigation is difficult in low light. GPS instability complicates autonomous flight. Battery life is short in humid conditions. Crashes are common, and recovery is often impossible. A lost drone becomes just another object absorbed by the forest. Even when drones operate above the canopy, their perspective remains limited. They see patterns, not processes. They capture moments, not cycles. They generate enormous amounts of data that must be interpreted carefully to avoid false conclusions. A patch of discoloration might indicate disease, seasonal change, or simple variation in species composition. Without ground verification, certainty remains elusive. Sensors placed in the forest to collect long-term data face their own challenges. Animals interact with them. Insects nest inside them. Plants grow around them. Floods submerge them. Trees fall and crush them. Over time, devices designed to observe the environment become part of it, altered in ways that compromise their function. Data retrieval adds another layer of difficulty. Collecting information is one challenge. Extracting it is another. Memory cards must be retrieved physically if wireless transmission fails. This requires returning to the site, navigating the same obstacles again, and hoping the device still functions. Gaps in data are common. Long-term continuity is hard to maintain. The forest also interferes with measurement in more subtle ways. Environmental variables fluctuate rapidly. Temperature, humidity, light levels, and biological activity change constantly across small distances. Capturing this variability requires dense networks of sensors, which are impractical to deploy and maintain. Sparse data risks misrepresenting complex dynamics. There is also a tendency to overtrust technology when it does work. A clean dataset can create a false sense of understanding. Models built on limited inputs may appear robust while overlooking key interactions. In the Amazon, missing variables matter. Small errors can propagate into large misunderstandings. This becomes particularly problematic when technological data is used to inform policy or large-scale decisions. Models may suggest stability where fragility exists, or resilience where thresholds are near. The forest's ability to absorb disturbance can mask underlying stress until sudden change occurs. Technology captures snapshots, not tipping points. Another limitation is temporal. Many technologies are deployed for short periods due to cost, logistics, or funding cycles. They capture brief windows of activity in a system that operates over decades. Patterns that require long observation remain invisible. Short-term data is mistaken for baseline behavior. There is also a cultural component to technological failure. Tools are designed with certain assumptions about environment and use. Those assumptions often reflect temperate climates, stable infrastructure, and predictable conditions. The Amazon violates these assumptions constantly. Adapting tools to this context requires rethinking design, not just improving performance. Indigenous knowledge systems often outperform technology in specific contexts, not because they are more advanced, but because they are better adapted. They rely on observation, memory, and relationships built over time. They do not require batteries or signals. They function continuously. This does not mean they replace technology, but it highlights the limits of external tools when divorced from local context. The failure of technology under the canopy is not total, it is selective. Some tools work some of the time, others fail quickly. The problem is unpredictability. You cannot rely on any single system consistently. Redundancy becomes essential, but redundancy adds weight, complexity, and dependency. This unpredictability erodes confidence. Planning becomes provisional, schedules slip, data gaps appear, projects overrun budgets, expectations must be adjusted downward repeatedly, exploration slows, not because of lack of effort, but because the environment refuses to cooperate with technological optimism. There is also an emotional dimension. Technology carries an implicit promise of control. When that promise fails, frustration follows. The forest feels resistant, even adversarial. But this resistance is not intentional. It is structural. The Amazon evolved without regard for human tools. Its conditions reflect biological priorities, not compatibility with electronics. Over time, experienced researchers learn to work with these limits rather than against them. They simplify setups. They plan for failure. They accept data loss as inevitable. This acceptance improves resilience but reduces ambition. Projects become narrower. Questions become more focused. Comprehensive understanding remains out of reach. This technological fragility reinforces the broader theme. The Amazon cannot be fully explored because the tools designed to extend human perception reach a point where they add complexity without clarity. They generate information that is partial, contingent, and difficult to integrate. As technology falters, reliance shifts back toward direct experience, local knowledge, and long-term presence. These approaches offer depth rather than breadth. They favour understanding over coverage. They align better with the forest's rhythms, but they also accept limits. And even these approaches encounter another boundary. Technology may fail under the canopy, but so do human senses. Vision is limited, memory is strained, fatigue accumulates, bodies wear down. The forest tests not just tools, but the people who carry them. As we move forward, the focus turns inward. Beyond maps, scale, rivers, green density, history, intelligence, and technology lies the most unavoidable constraint of all. The human body and mind themselves operating at the edge of endurance in a place that never stops demanding attention. One of the quiet assumptions people bring into the Amazon is that life there is obvious, that animals are everywhere, that movement is constant, that sound and motion will announce themselves. This expectation comes from documentaries filled with close-ups, dramatic narration, and carefully chosen moments. What those images rarely show is the long stretches of apparent stillness. Hours when nothing visible moves, days where the forest feels empty again, not because it is, but because its inhabitants have evolved to stay unseen. In the Amazon, survival often depends on not being noticed. Most of the forest's animals are not rare, they are simply cautious. They live in an environment where being detected can mean death, and over millions of years natural selection has favoured those who blend in, move quietly, and reveal themselves only when necessary. Bright colours exist, but often high in the canopy or in brief flashes. Loud calls happen, but usually at specific times, from specific places, and for specific reasons. Outside those windows, silence dominates. For someone trying to explore or study the Amazon, this creates a profound mismatch between expectation and experience. You enter one of the most biodiverse places on Earth and see very little. Not because there is little to see, but because nearly everything has learned how not to be seen by creatures much more perceptive than humans. Camouflage in the Amazon is not decorative, it is precise. Insects resemble leaves down to the appearance of veins and decay. Frogs match the colour and texture of bark or moss. Snakes disappear against forest floor patterns so completely that even trained observers miss them at close range. Predators and prey alike use concealment, which means that noticing one animal often means that many others have already noticed you. Movement is equally controlled. Sudden motion draws attention. Many animals move slowly, pausing frequently, syncing their movement with wind or falling leaves. Some species freeze entirely when threatened, relying on stillness rather than escape. To a human eye scanning for activity, this reads as absence. Even large animals are difficult to observe. Jaguars, tapirs, and peccaries leave signs of their presence, tracks, scat, disturbed vegetation, but rarely offer direct sightings. They are active at times when visibility is low. They use terrain strategically. They alter routes when they detect unfamiliar scents or sounds. Long before you enter their space, they have already adjusted to avoid you. Sound, which might seem like a more reliable indicator, is deceptive. The forest's acoustic environment is complex. Insects dominate many soundscapes. Bird calls overlap. Echoes distort direction. A call might seem close but originate high in the canopy. Another might be far away but sound near. Silence itself can be meaningful, signalling the presence of a predator that has already caused others to stop calling. Animals also learn. They adapt not just to natural predators, but to humans. In regions where hunting pressure exists, animals become more nocturnal, more secretive, more selective in movement. Even research activity can alter behaviour. Trails created for study become avoided zones. Camera traps are investigated, damaged, or learned around. Observation changes what is being observed. This avoidance complicates data collection. Population estimates rely heavily on indirect evidence. Tracks, calls, camera trap images, and genetic traces are used to infer presence and abundance. Each method has limitations. Tracks degrade quickly. Calls vary by season and context. Camera traps capture only what passes directly in front of them. Genetic samples are expensive and localized. The result is uncertainty layered on uncertainty. You know animals are there, but you cannot easily say how many, where exactly, or how they move over time. Patterns emerge slowly and often contradict earlier assumptions. Species thought to be rare turn out to be widespread but elusive. Others thought common are found to be declining quietly, without dramatic signs. There's also vertical avoidance. Many species live almost entirely above human eye level. The canopy is its own world, with different light, temperature, and food availability. Animals there may never come to the ground. Studying them requires climbing, towers, or indirect methods. Even then, observation is partial. A human observer in the canopy is still a visitor in a space optimized for non-human movement. Some animals actively monitor humans. Primates often notice people long before people notice them. Birds change calls, insects adjust activity patterns. What feels like exploration is often surveillance in reverse. You are being assessed, categorized as threat or irrelevance, and responded to accordingly. This dynamic creates a strange imbalance. The forest is full of eyes and senses far more attuned than ours. Smell, vibration, subtle sound cues, changes in airflow. Humans are comparatively blunt instruments. We move loudly, we smell strongly. We rely heavily on vision in a place that limits it. From the forest perspective, we are easy to detect and easy to avoid. This avoidance reinforces the illusion that the Amazon is quieter, emptier, or less active than it truly is. It also feeds the myth of danger. When animals are rarely seen, imagination fills the gap. Stories emphasize threat rather than absence. In reality, most animals avoid confrontation entirely. Attacks are rare precisely because avoidance is so effective. For exploration, this means that knowledge of animal life is often built from fragments. A single camera trap image becomes significant. A brief sighting is recorded repeatedly. Entire papers may be written around a few seconds of footage. This is not because researchers lack rigor, but because opportunities for direct observation are limited. Time compounds this. Many animals have activity cycles tied to dawn, dusk, or night. Short observation windows demand patience and repetition. Miss the window, and the forest closes again. Long stretches of waiting are common. Productivity cannot be rushed. This waiting affects morale and perception. The mind expects reward for effort. When effort yields little visible result, frustration grows. Doubt follows. Are we in the right place? Are we asking the right questions? Are the methods flawed? Often the answer is simpler. The animals are there. They are just very good at not being seen. Indigenous hunters understand this deeply. Tracking is not about spotting animals directly. It is about reading subtle signs, broken twigs, disturbed leaf litter, changes in insect activity, shifts in sound patterns. Knowledge is cumulative and situational. It cannot be rushed or automated easily. Modern exploration struggles to replicate this sensitivity. Technology helps, but only partially. Sensors and cameras reduce reliance on human presence, but they still sample selectively. What they miss remains unknown. This selective visibility places a hard limit on comprehensive understanding. You cannot fully explore a system when its inhabitants actively minimize their detectability. You can approximate, you can infer, you can model. But certainty remains elusive, and this elusiveness is not accidental. It is the product of long evolutionary pressure in a crowded ecosystem. The Amazon is full not because life is loud and obvious, but because it is subtle and efficient. As we continue deeper into the constraints on exploration, this becomes a recurring theme. The forest does not announce itself. It does not present neatly. It requires a kind of attention that humans can sustain only briefly. And sustaining that attention takes a toll, not just on tools or methods, but on the people themselves, whose bodies and minds were never designed for constant vigilance in a place that never truly rests. Time in the Amazon does not announce its difference immediately. At first it looks familiar. Days begin and end. Light shifts. People wake, move, rest. Clocks still function, at least technically. But the longer you stay, the more those familiar markers lose their authority. Schedules soften, durations stretch or collapse. What feels like a short task consumes a day. What feels like a long wait passes unnoticed. Time is still passing, but it no longer aligns cleanly with expectation. This dislocation is not psychological alone, it is structural. The Amazon runs on multiple overlapping timescales that rarely sync with human ones, and exploration falters when it assumes they should. One of the first disruptions comes from daylight itself. Near the equator, day length remains relatively constant throughout the year. There are no long summer evenings or short winter days. Sunrise and sunset arrive with regularity, but without gradual transition. Twilight is brief. Darkness falls quickly. This removes one of the cues many people rely on subconsciously to pace activity. Days feel flatter, less differentiated. Without long changes in light, it becomes harder to sense seasonal progression intuitively. Seasonality still exists, but it expresses itself through water rather than light. Wet and dry seasons define the rhythm of the forest. These seasons are not gentle. They transform the environment dramatically. Rivers rise and fall by meters. Entire regions shift from land to water and back again. Roads disappear. New routes open. Animals alter behaviour. Plants respond on different schedules. Time here is measured in floods and retreats rather than months and dates. This makes planning fragile. A calendar date tells you little about conditions on the ground. A delay of a few weeks can mean the difference between passable terrain and impassable swamp. Arrive too early and paths are submerged. Too late and water access is gone. The forest does not wait for coordination. It moves when it moves. Exploration projects often struggle here because they are built around fixed timelines. Permits expire, funding windows close, teams rotate. The forest does not care. Its processes unfold according to rainfall patterns that may shift year to year. When plans fall out of sync, work stalls not because of error, but because of mismatch. Even daily time behaves differently. Tasks take longer than expected, not due to inefficiency, but due to accumulation. Heat slows movement. Humidity demands rest. Equipment failures interrupt progress. Navigation detours add hours. What looks like a simple objective becomes an all-day effort. This compresses schedules until little fits cleanly. Waiting becomes a dominant activity. Waiting for rain to stop. Waiting for water levels to drop. Waiting for animals to appear. Waiting for equipment to function. Waiting for transport. Waiting for conditions to align. This waiting is not passive. It demands attention, patience, and restraint. Acting too soon often makes things worse. For people used to environments where speed signals competence, this can be deeply uncomfortable. Productivity feels low. Progress feels invisible. Yet this waiting is part of how the forest operates. Many processes cannot be rushed without consequences. Seeds germinate on their own schedule. Fish migrate when water levels dictate. Pollinators arrive when conditions align. Time in the Amazon is negotiated, not enforced. Memory behaves differently here as well. Days blur together. Without strong visual landmarks or varied routines, experiences lose sharp edges. The mind struggles to sequence events. Was that yesterday or last week? Did that happen before or after the flood? Without external markers, internal timelines drift. This makes documentation harder. Notes become essential, yet taking them consistently under physical strain is challenging. Long-term studies reveal another layer of temporal complexity. Some patterns emerge only over decades: tree growth cycles, soil development, species migration shifts, feedback loops between vegetation and climate. These processes exceed the lifespan of most research projects. A study may capture change but not completion. Conclusions remain provisional, awaiting future context that may never arrive. This temporal mismatch limits understanding. Humans prefer narratives with beginnings, middles, and ends. The Amazon offers continuities. Processes overlap. Causes and effects are separated by long delays. An intervention today may produce visible consequences years later, far from the original site. Tracking these chains requires patience rarely supported institutionally. Indigenous perspectives often align more closely with these rhythms. Time is embedded in cycles rather than units. Knowledge is passed through seasons, stories, and repeated practice. Events are remembered in relation to floods, harvests, migrations, rather than dates. This temporal framing supports adaptation. It accepts change as constant rather than disruptive. External exploration tends to impose linear time. Timelines, milestones, deadlines, reports. These tools are efficient elsewhere, but in the Amazon they distort reality. They privilege what can be measured quickly over what unfolds slowly. They reward visible outcomes over subtle shifts. They encourage intervention rather than observation. The forest responds accordingly. Short-term studies capture surface dynamics. Long-term processes remain obscured. Understanding skews toward immediacy. The deeper logic of the system stays just out of reach. There is also the effect of biological time on the human body. Circadian rhythms are challenged by heat, humidity, and irregular schedules. Sleep quality declines, fatigue accumulates, recovery slows. Days feel longer, not because more happens, but because everything requires more effort. This alters perception. Time feels heavy. Moments stretch. This heaviness affects decision-making. Under fatigue, caution may decrease or increase unpredictably. Risk assessment shifts. Attention narrows. Errors become more likely. Exploration slows, not just because the environment is demanding, but because the human nervous system adapts imperfectly. Illness introduces another temporal distortion. Recovery takes longer in hot, humid conditions. Minor injuries linger, infection risks increase. What would be a brief setback elsewhere becomes a prolonged interruption. Time stretches around vulnerability. Even decay operates on accelerated schedules. Organic matter breaks down quickly. Evidence disappears. Samples degrade, miss a window, and the opportunity is gone. This creates pressure to act quickly, in tension with the need to wait for conditions. Time pulls in opposing directions simultaneously. This push and pull defines much of what makes the Amazon resistant to full exploration. You must wait, but waiting costs resources. You must act, but acting prematurely creates problems. There is no stable pace that satisfies both human systems and ecological reality. Over longer horizons, the forest's time dwarfs ours entirely. Trees live for centuries. Soil formation spans millennia. Evolutionary processes stretch beyond recorded history. Against this backdrop, human presence is brief. Expeditions come and go. Projects begin and end. The forest barely registers the interruption. This perspective can be humbling. It reframes exploration as a fleeting interaction rather than a comprehensive survey. You're not capturing a system, you're intersecting with it momentarily. Whatever you observe is conditioned by that moment. This is why knowledge of the Amazon often feels incomplete, even after decades of study. It is not because of negligence or lack of effort. It is because understanding a system that operates on multiple, asynchronous timescales requires a kind of continuity humans rarely sustain. As time stretches and folds in the Amazon, another constraint becomes clearer. It is not only the forest's time that differs, it is the finite time humans can remain present, attentive, and functional within it. Bodies tire, minds fatigue, memory fades, and these limits quietly shape what exploration can ever hope to achieve long before the forest itself runs out of things to reveal. The idea that exploration is limited by environment alone is comforting. It suggests that if terrain were gentler, technology stronger, or planning smarter, full understanding would eventually follow. The Amazon dismantles that idea quietly. Long before the forest reaches its limits, the human body and mind reach theirs, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, persistently, in ways that reshape what exploration looks like from the inside. The human body did not evolve for constant heat and humidity. It can tolerate them, adapt to them temporarily, but it never truly settles into comfort. Sweat becomes constant. Clothing never fully dries. Skin softens, blisters, and breaks more easily. Small cuts linger. Infections become more likely. Energy is spent simply maintaining balance rather than gathering information. Over time, this drains reserves that exploration depends on. Movement becomes costly. Each step requires more effort than expected. Not because the terrain is always extreme, but because resistance is everywhere. Thick air, uneven ground, routes that force constant adjustment. Balance is never automatic. Muscles work continuously, even when standing still. Rest does not fully restore energy because the environment never fully relaxes its demands. Sleep suffers early. Heat and humidity interfere with rest. Insects interrupt it. Noises carry unpredictably through the forest. The mind stays alert even when the body is exhausted. Over time, sleep debt accumulates. Concentration falters. Reaction times slow. Judgment softens around the edges. Exploration becomes harder not because conditions worsen, but because perception dulls. The immune system works over time. Exposure to unfamiliar microbes, parasites and allergens is constant. Even with precautions, illness is common. Fevers appear without warning. Digestive systems rebel. Dehydration sneaks up quietly. Recovery takes longer than expected. A day lost to sickness becomes several. Schedules unravel. Momentum breaks. Pain becomes background noise. Not severe enough to stop movement, but persistent enough to shape decisions. A sore knee discourages detours. A strained shoulder limits climbing. Blisters change gait. These adjustments seem minor, but over weeks they accumulate, narrowing options and altering routes. The body becomes a filter through which the forest is experienced, deciding what is reachable and what remains theoretical. The mind responds to this strain in subtle ways. Attention narrows under fatigue. Curiosity competes with survival instincts. The desire to document gives way to the need to finish tasks efficiently. Observation becomes selective. Details are missed not because they are unimportant, but because the mind cannot hold everything at once. Stress compounds this effect. Navigation uncertainty, equipment failures, communication gaps, weather unpredictability, each adds a small cognitive load. Together they consume mental bandwidth. Decision-making becomes reactive rather than exploratory. The forest dictates pace and direction more strongly as internal resources thin. Memory, often treated as a reliable record, begins to soften. Days blend together. Events lose clear sequence. Without strong visual anchors or routine variation, experiences blur. The mind struggles to tag moments distinctly. Was that observation made here or farther upstream? Did that happen before the storm or after? Without constant note-taking, recall becomes approximate. Even with notes, memory remains imperfect. Writing under physical strain produces gaps. Fatigue leads to shorthand. Context is lost. Later, when reviewing records, meaning must be reconstructed. This reconstruction introduces error. Small inaccuracies propagate. Over time, the narrative of what was observed diverges subtly from what actually occurred. This fragility of memory limits cumulative understanding. Exploration depends not just on experience, but on accurate retention and transmission of that experience. When memory degrades, knowledge fragments. Insights remain personal rather than transferable. Others cannot fully build on what was learned. Group dynamics are affected as well. Teams under strain communicate less precisely. Misunderstandings arise. Frustration grows quietly. Morale fluctuates. Leadership decisions carry heavier weight. A single misjudgment can cascade into days of delay or increased risk. Emotional resilience becomes as important as physical endurance. There is also the psychological impact of immersion in an environment that offers little external validation. Progress is hard to measure. Achievements feel small against the vastness surrounding them. This can erode motivation. Doubt creeps in. Are we making a difference? Are these observations meaningful? Without clear feedback, persistence becomes an act of will rather than confidence. Extended exposure can alter perception itself. The forest becomes the reference frame. External concerns fade. Time back home feels abstract. This immersion can deepen understanding, but it can also isolate. Returning to analytical distance becomes harder. Objectivity blurs with experience. Interpretation shifts subtly, shaped by fatigue, attachment, and survival priorities. The body keeps score even when the mind pushes forward. Injuries that seem manageable accumulate. Recovery requires leaving the forest, sometimes abruptly. Projects end early not because questions are answered, but because bodies cannot continue. This is rarely framed as failure, but it quietly defines the boundary of exploration. Human limits also shape what kinds of questions get asked. Complex, long-term inquiries require sustained presence. Sustained presence demands health, funding, and continuity. When these cannot be guaranteed, research narrows. Safer, shorter-term studies replace deeper ones. Knowledge advances incrementally rather than comprehensively. This is not a weakness unique to the Amazon. It exists everywhere. But here the environment amplifies it. The forest does not accommodate human frailty. It does not slow down. It does not adjust. It simply continues, indifferent to exhaustion. Indigenous communities navigate these limits differently. Their lives are structured around long-term adaptation rather than short-term endurance. Knowledge is distributed across generations rather than concentrated in individuals. Memory is shared through stories, routines, and collective practice. This diffuses strain. It allows continuity where external exploration often fractures. External projects rarely achieve this continuity. Teams rotate. Knowledge is archived rather than lived. Gaps form between what was known and what is remembered. Over time, understanding becomes segmented across reports, papers, and memories that do not fully align. The forest remains whole. Human knowledge remains partial. This is why the Amazon resists being fully explored not through active opposition, but through quiet persistence. It outlasts bodies. It outlasts tension. It outlasts memory. The constraints are not dramatic barriers, but accumulations of small limits that shape what is possible. As human capacity thins, another pattern emerges. The forest itself begins to change, not just naturally, but in response to external pressure. Roads cut through, clearings expand, edges form, and with those changes comes a new challenge. The Amazon that explorers seek to understand does not stay the same long enough for understanding to catch up. The Amazon is often described as ancient, and that description is not wrong, but it is incomplete. The forest is not ancient in the sense of being static or preserved. It is ancient in the sense of having survived constant change. What endures here is not form, but process. The Amazon does not hold still long enough to be fully known because it is always rewriting itself, quietly, continuously, and at every scale that matters. Change in the forest is not an interruption. It is the default state. Trees fall every day. Some collapse dramatically during storms. Others die slowly and give way without noise. Each fall opens a gap in the canopy, allowing light to reach the forest floor. That light triggers a cascade of growth. Seedlings surge upward. Vines race to fill space. Insects arrive. Birds follow. Within weeks, the gap begins to close. Within years, it becomes nearly indistinguishable from the surrounding forest. What looked like destruction becomes opportunity. What looked like loss becomes transition. This constant regeneration makes the forest incredibly difficult to fix in time. Any snapshot is misleading. A healthy forest includes decay. A damaged area may be in the middle of recovery. Without long-term context, it is easy to misinterpret what is happening. A clearing might be read as degradation when it is regeneration. Dense growth might be read as stability when it masks recent disruption. At larger scales, the same principle applies. Floodplains expand and contract. River courses shift. Soil chemistry evolves. Species composition changes subtly over decades. The Amazon does not preserve its own past in visible layers the way some landscapes do. It incorporates it. The result is a forest that carries history forward without displaying it clearly. This self-rewriting frustrates exploration because it undermines accumulation. You cannot return to a place expecting it to present the same conditions. Long-term monitoring is essential, but difficult to maintain. Gaps in observation break continuity. When researchers return after years away, they often find a system that has moved on. This movement is not random. It follows ecological logic. Disturbance creates opportunity. Opportunity reshapes competition. Competition alters dominance. Dominance affects structure. Structure feeds back into disturbance. The loop never closes. It only evolves. Human activity adds another layer to this rewriting. Roads fragment the forest. Edges form where forest meets cleared land. These edges behave differently from interior forest. Light penetrates more deeply. Wind dries soil. Invasive species gain footholds. Fire risk increases. The forest responds by changing species composition and growth patterns. Even when clearing stops, the regrown forest is not identical to what came before. This means that the Amazon being studied today is not the Amazon of a century ago, nor is it the Amazon of a decade ago. It is a moving target shaped by climate change, deforestation, selective logging, fire, and global atmospheric shifts. Each factor alters trajectories subtly but persistently. For exploration, this creates a race condition. By the time understanding is built, the system has changed enough to make that understanding partially obsolete. Models must be updated, assumptions revised, baselines redefined. Knowledge remains provisional by necessity. Climate change accelerates this rewriting. Rainfall patterns shift. Droughts intensify. Floods become less predictable. Some tree species struggle to adapt. Others expand. Feedback loops between forest and atmosphere begin to weaken. The forest's ability to generate its own rain diminishes in some regions. These changes interact in ways that are difficult to isolate or predict. Exploration struggles here because cause and effect blur. A change observed in one area may result from distant drivers. Deforestation hundreds of kilometers away alters regional climate. Global emissions influence local stress. The forest rewrites itself in response to forces that do not originate within it. This complexity challenges the idea of pristine reference states. What does it mean to understand the Amazon? when there is no fixed version to understand? Which moment serves as baseline? Which configuration represents the forest as it truly is? The answer depends on perspective and timescale, and no single answer satisfies all contexts. Indigenous communities often recognize this fluidity intuitively. Land is not static, it requires adjustment. Practices shift with conditions. Knowledge is updated through experience rather than fixed instruction. This adaptability supports survival, but it resists codification. External exploration often seeks stable rules where none exist. Scientific methods adapt by focusing on processes rather than states, rates of change, feedback mechanisms, thresholds. Even so, uncertainty remains. Thresholds are not always visible until crossed. Feedbacks may amplify or dampen change unpredictably. The forest's rewriting is not linear. It includes sudden shifts alongside gradual trends. Fire illustrates this well. In parts of the Amazon, fire was historically rare. Increased drought and human activity have introduced it more frequently. Once fire enters a system not adapted to it, recovery trajectories change. Species composition shifts toward fire-tolerant plants. Edges expand. Vulnerability increases. The forest rewrites itself in a direction that may be difficult to reverse. Exploration must now contend not only with complexity, but with urgency. The forest is changing faster than before. Long-term studies risk being overtaken by events. Data collected under one set of conditions may no longer apply. Understanding lags behind transformation. This creates a strange tension. The more the Amazon changes, the more important understanding becomes, and yet the faster it changes, the harder comprehensive understanding becomes. Exploration accelerates, but clarity does not keep pace. The forest's ability to rewrite itself also affects preservation efforts. Protecting a static snapshot is impossible. Conservation must focus on resilience, connectivity, and adaptability rather than preservation of specific configurations. This requires embracing uncertainty. It requires accepting that change is inevitable, but that direction can still be influenced. From an exploratory standpoint, this reframes success. It is no longer about mapping everything or cataloguing all species. It is about recognizing patterns of change, identifying leverage points, and understanding how systems respond under stress. This is slower, less satisfying work. It offers fewer definitive conclusions. The Amazon does not reward final answers. It rewards attentiveness. It rewards humility. It rewards approaches that accept incompleteness as a feature rather than a flaw. As the forest rewrites itself, another realization emerges. Even if we could overcome scale, density, and visibility, technological failure, biological limits, and shifting time, knowledge would still remain partial. Not because we have failed, but because the system itself does not allow for total capture. And this leads naturally to the final constraint. Not the forest's resistance, but the nature of knowledge itself. What it means to know a place like the Amazon, and why that knowledge, no matter how carefully gathered, will always remain unfinished. There is a quiet discomfort that sits beneath every serious attempt to understand the Amazon. It appears after years of effort, after data has been gathered, models refined, reports written, and conclusions cautiously stated. The discomfort comes from realizing that nothing feels finished. No matter how much is learned, it never resolves into a complete picture. Knowledge accumulates, but closure does not arrive. This is not a temporary problem waiting for better tools or more time. It is structural. In the Amazon, knowledge is always incomplete because the system itself never presents all of itself at once. Understanding usually depends on boundaries. You define a subject, isolate it, study it, and place it within a larger framework. The Amazon resists this at every step. Boundaries blur, systems overlap. Causes and effects refuse to stay local. A study of trees becomes a study of soil, climate, fungi, insects, and human history, whether intended or not. Narrow questions expand involuntarily. This expansion overwhelms the capacity for synthesis. Each discipline sees a different Amazon. Ecologists see feedback loops, hydrologists see flows, anthropologists see histories and cultures, climatologists see atmospheric engines. None of these views are wrong, all of them are partial. Integrating them into a single coherent understanding is not just difficult, it may be impossible without losing essential detail. Even within a single field, certainty is fragile. Data is patchy. Sampling is uneven. Regions studied intensively sit next to regions barely visited. Findings from one area do not generalize cleanly to another. Patterns identified in one decade shift in the next. Confidence intervals remain wide. Conclusions carry footnotes and caveats. This incompleteness is not the result of poor science. It is the result of scale, complexity, and change operating simultaneously. The forest is too large to sample evenly, too dynamic to freeze, and too interconnected to isolate cleanly. Any attempt to simplify it enough to be fully known strips away what makes it function. There's also the problem of unseen variables. Many processes operate below detection thresholds. Microbial activity, chemical signaling, genetic variation. Small shifts in these layers can produce large effects over time. Because they are hard to observe directly, they enter models indirectly, if at all. Unknown. Unknowns remain part of every explanation. Temporal limits compound this. Some processes unfold over centuries. Tree lifespans exceed research careers. Soil development spans millennia. Cultural knowledge evolves across generations. Short-term studies capture slices, not trajectories. Long-term continuity is rare. When continuity breaks, interpretation weakens. Human institutions struggle with this kind of timescale. Funding cycles end, priorities change. Data is archived and revisited by people who are not present for its collection. Context is lost. Meaning degrades. The forest continues regardless. Language itself becomes a limitation. Words like forest, river, species, and ecosystem imply discrete units. In reality, boundaries are fuzzy. Categories overlap. Naming something creates the illusion of separation. This illusion makes communication possible, but it also distorts understanding. The map reappears, this time in language rather than space. Indigenous knowledge highlights another dimension of incompleteness. Much of what is known about the Amazon exists outside written records. It lives in stories, practices, and daily interaction. This knowledge is deep but local. It is adaptive rather than exhaustive. It does not aim to explain everything, only what matters for living well within specific contexts. When translated into external frameworks, much of its nuance is lost. Attempts to merge these knowledge systems often fall short. External science seeks generalizable rules. Indigenous knowledge prioritizes situational judgment. Both are valid. Neither fully replaces the other. Their coexistence produces richness, but also tension. No unified epistemology emerges. There is also the influence of expectation. People approach the Amazon wanting answers. How many species exist? How resilient is the forest? Where are the thresholds? These questions imply that stable answers exist. Often they do not, or they exist only temporarily. The forest offers probabilities, not guarantees. Uncertainty is uncomfortable, especially when decisions depend on knowledge. Policies require numbers. Conservation plans require targets. Development decisions require predictions. Incomplete knowledge complicates all of this. Simplification becomes tempting. Complexity is reduced for the sake of action. This is sometimes necessary, but it always comes at a cost. Exploration is shaped by these pressures. Research focuses on what can be measured reliably rather than what might matter most. Metrics become proxies. Proxies become stand-ins for reality. Over time, understanding drifts toward what is legible rather than what is complete. There is also a deeper philosophical limit. Knowing a place fully implies detachment. It suggests standing outside the system and observing it in totality. The Amazon does not allow this position. To be present is to participate. To participate is to influence. Complete knowledge would require non-involvement, which is impossible. This means that understanding is always relational. It depends on where you stand, when you observe, and how you interact. Different observers generate different truths. None are final, all are contingent. This contingency does not make knowledge meaningless. It makes it provisional, useful but not exhaustive, accurate but not complete. This distinction matters. Expecting completeness leads to frustration and overconfidence. Accepting incompleteness encourages caution and humility. The Amazon exposes this tension more clearly than most places. Its scale magnifies uncertainty. Its changeability resists closure. Its density hides as much as it reveals. Each attempt to know it fully reveals the limits of knowing itself. In this sense, the Amazon is not an anomaly. It is an extreme example of a broader truth. Complex systems cannot be fully captured without ceasing to be what they are. The act of total description simplifies away essential dynamics. This realization reframes the original question: why can't we truly explore the Amazon? Because exploration, as traditionally defined, assumes an endpoint, a moment when the unknown becomes known. The Amazon does not offer that moment. What it offers instead is ongoing relationship, a continuous process of learning, revising, and adjusting. Knowledge here is not a destination, it is a practice, and with that understanding comes a final shift. If the Amazon cannot be fully explored, not because of failure, but because of what it is, then the most meaningful question is no longer how to conquer or complete it. It becomes how to live with it, learn from it, and move forward without pretending that mastery is possible. There is a quiet change that happens when the idea of conquering the Amazon finally falls away. Not dramatically, not with a declaration. It fades slowly, replaced by something less satisfying to the ego and far more accurate to reality. The understanding that this is not a place to be finished, solved, or completed. It is a place that allows entry for a time, and then continues on without concern for what we take away from the visit. For centuries, exploration has been framed as a forward motion toward mastery. You arrive, you map, you name, you document. You leave with the sense that something has been brought under control, even if only intellectually. That framework works reasonably well in environments that are stable, bounded, and slow to change. The Amazon is none of those things. Applying the language of conquest here has always been a misunderstanding, but one so deeply embedded that it takes effort to unlearn. The forest does not respond to conquest in the way humans expect. It does not submit. It does not organize itself to fit imposed systems. It absorbs, it reroutes, it adapts. Attempts to dominate it often succeed only in destabilizing parts of the system while leaving the whole intact. Roads disappear, clearings regrow, water finds new paths. The forest responds, but not by yielding, by continuing. Seeing the Amazon as a place we visit rather than conquer changes the tone of engagement entirely. A visit implies limits. It acknowledges that presence is temporary. That understanding is partial. That respect is necessary. You do not visit a place expecting to take everything from it. You observe, you listen, you adapt, you leave knowing the place will persist without you. This perspective aligns more closely with how the forest actually functions. It is not waiting for explanation. It is not incomplete without human interpretation. It operates on its own terms, across timescales, that dwarf individual lives and institutions. When humans arrive, they become one more influence among many, not the central one. Exploration, reframed this way, becomes something quieter. It is no longer about coverage or completion. It is about presence, about paying attention during the brief window allowed, about learning enough to act with care rather than confidence. This kind of exploration produces fewer headlines and more footnotes, but it produces fewer illusions as well. The Amazon has already taught this lesson repeatedly, though it is often ignored. Large-scale projects designed with certainty encounter unexpected consequences. Predictions fail, interventions cascade, confidence dissolves into revision. Each time, the forest demonstrates that it cannot be treated as a passive object without consequence. Indigenous communities have long understood this dynamic. Their relationship with the forest is not based on ownership in the external sense, but on continuity. Knowledge is passed down not as a claim of total understanding, but as guidance for living responsibly within limits. The forest is not conquered. It is negotiated with, season by season, generation by generation. This negotiation does not romanticize the Amazon. Life here is demanding. Survival requires effort, skill, and restraint. But it recognizes that endurance comes from alignment rather than dominance, from working with systems rather than attempting to overwrite them. For those outside the forest, this reframing carries implications. It challenges the expectation that every place can be fully known if enough resources are applied. It challenges the belief that visibility equals understanding. It challenges the idea that lack of completion is a failure rather than an accurate outcome. The Amazon reminds us that some places exceed the frameworks built to describe them, that some systems are too dynamic, too interconnected, too alive to be reduced to final answers. In these cases, humility is not a moral gesture. It is a practical necessity. This does not mean disengagement. Visiting still matters. Learning still matters. Protecting still matters. But the motivation shifts. Instead of seeking mastery, the goal becomes stewardship informed by partial understanding. Instead of pretending to see everything, the aim becomes to see enough to avoid harm. In this sense, the Amazon is not an exception. It is a preview. As human influence expands and systems become more interdependent, more places will resist simple narratives of control. Climate, oceans, biodiversity, and even cities increasingly behave like the forest, responsive, adaptive, and unpredictable. Learning to visit rather than conquer may be one of the most important adjustments humans make. The Amazon simply makes the lesson unavoidable, so when we ask why we can't truly explore the Amazon, the answer is not that it is hostile, secretive, or incomplete. It is that it is whole in a way that does not pause for inspection, whole in a way that cannot be flattened without losing what matters. We can enter it, we can study parts of it, we can learn from it, we can be changed by it, but we cannot finish it. And perhaps that is not a limitation to overcome, but a boundary to respect. Wherever you are listening from now, whatever time it happens to be in your part of the world, the Amazon continues. Not waiting, not watching, just existing, vast, responsive, unfinished by design. If this quiet journey brought you any sense of calm, perspective, or curiosity, you're welcome to like the video or share it with someone else who enjoys learning at an unhurried pace. And as you drift onward into whatever comes next, remember that some places are not meant to be solved, only approached carefully and left standing long after we step away.